It's important to understand how to best provide the insights so that you can help the designer design better. But at the same time, it's not necessary that all the insights can be baked in.
Welcome to the Industry of UX, a podcast crafted to review, share, and discuss the ins and outs of the user experience industry. Let's dive into the episode. Hello, you wonderful UXers. Welcome back to another episode of the Industry of UX. I'm your host, Filippo Lovotti. I don't know about you, but January just flew by for me. I can't believe we are already in the middle of February. Anyway, today I'm really excited because we are talking about UX research with one of my favorite researchers, Sourav Bhuyan. Sourav is part of the research team here at Zappos, and I've worked with him quite a few times on quite a few projects. What I like most about Sourav's approach is how he takes both qualitative and quantitative data and overlaps them to find what he calls superior insights. So imagine this. Take customer feedback on one end, add analytics data on the other, and on top of it, just put experts' feedback, mix them up, and you can extract some extremely valuable and game-changing insights. And that is some of what Sourav brings to the research realm. In the conversation you're about to hear, Sourav talks in depth about user research. It's pretty cool to hear how he's using some of his engineering background to bring rigor in his process. He also explains some of the best practices when it comes to home visits and collaborating with UX designers. And one last thing, he also goes into his experience with some cool eye tracking studies. So make sure you catch that too. Heads up, Sourav is open to mentoring too. So check out the entire episode or go to industryofux.com to see how you can get in touch with him. And let me know what you think about the episode by leaving a comment on our subreddit, The Industry of UX, or by tweeting @IndustryUX. No offense to Android users, but if you like the episode, go on Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star rating and a review. It helps us climb the charts, bring the episode to a bigger audience, and ultimately produce a better show. Now, on to the conversation with Sourav.
So I have an undergrad in mechanical engineering, which has nothing to do with UX, and I have a grad degree in industrial engineering, which is master's in industrial engineering, which again has nothing to do with UX. So when I graduated from my mechanical engineering as my undergrad degree, I decided to after a couple of years, pursue masters in industrial engineering. I had a couple of years of experience as a marketing engineer. So I used to work with a company that sold forklifts and trucks and had everything to do with distribution centers. And so my goal getting into masters was to get into supply chain or logistics or operational research. And I was hoping to get into that, not really expected. In my statement of purpose, I wrote that I'm going to do this. I'm going to be like a greatest supply chain expert in the field of industrial engineering. Then I got into my master's program. First year of master's, it was all the core courses that you would take in industrial engineering. But I think what struck me and what I found was interesting was a course called Human Factors Engineering. And I got introduced to a book, and I can't recall the book, but it was about product design. It was about product development and design. And the idea of that book and the course which I took in my second semester was around how do you develop a product? How do you understand user stories? How do you understand user needs? How do you differentiate between what actually a customer needs and what could be a latent need? And that was a precursor to my UX journey. So I eventually started to kind of work towards my master's thesis in usability. And if you care enough, I was studying the usability of passwords, of all things usability. And then slowly and steadily, I kind of finished my thesis and around that particular subject. And that's how I got introduced into the world of UX, which as a practitioner was definitely something that was new to me as I got into the work of UX. But I think some of the story that is how I got into it. I accidentally kind of stumbled upon very late into it, and I wanted to specifically kind of specialize in that while I had different plans in my master's degree.
That's interesting how you went into engineering and then changed course into research and eventually into UX. Are there any lessons that you've learned during your engineering degree that you're now carrying over in your current role?
I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples. I had a course in mechanical engineering called design of experiments, or design of machinery, or design. We basically design pulleys or mechanical devices. I was never a design like a U. I'm not a UX designer, but what you can glean from that practice or the course of designing an experiment or designing a pulley is the is how meticulous you need to be with certain things, you know, the how you design certain things. Of course, I'm not using Figma, I'm not using, sorry, I'm throwing in words here, InVision and Abstract. I'm not using any of that, or like all these tools right now, but I know from a philosophical standpoint that when you design a structure or a system, that needs to be perfect. It needs to have room for error. Otherwise, that particular device will break. It's almost like a life and death situation. So you can carry forward that meticulous habit or that attention to detail into design or UX too. So that's an example. Another thing that I learned from industrial engineering is the lean philosophy. So you hear the word lean UX, and that comes from a lot of supply chain philosophies, a lot of philosophies in making sure there is the process improvement that you're doing in industrial engineering or producing something is does not have a lot of waste, or it's just in time JIT. So all these philosophies and all these best practices have been taken from manufacturing and also can be applied to UX or product management or anything of that sort. That's why a lot of lean UX philosophies could imagine come from there. All the best practices do get applied there. So I think I always believe like whatever your education is, it just adds more value as you try to learn more things. You can bring in diverse, and especially if you have very diverse background, you can bring in a lot into UX. So let's say you have a very different degree, or you may not have a degree, but you have life experiences that's going to be very, very diverse. And imagine that you bring that life experience or theoretical experience onto UX. What you're doing essentially is you're empathizing with the process, you're empathizing with people, and you're empathizing with this scenario to create great products or great experiences.
See, that's some really good stuff right there. But let me ask you a completely not loaded question. Looking at the landscape in UX right now, I'd probably speculate, and I may be wrong, but the vast majority of folks in our field are somewhat related to design. Have you ever flirted with the idea of ditching research in favor of a career in design?
Design is an integral part of UX research. I have complementary knowledge of design. I would, given the opportunity, I would love to learn a lot about design. I know design has gone past multiple leaps in terms of what it is versus probably the time I was in school. I didn't study design in school, but I used to read a lot about design. I, in fact, took an extension class in a university to understand better about design. So I know in my alternate life, I would have been a designer. I think knowing design is very important for me to serve the research insights. I cannot do without that. And I have to understand the principles behind the design. I have to understand what you would say classically human computer interaction, or how users use a particular product through design. I have been surrounded by great colleagues and mentors to understand the difference between maybe a visual design and an interaction design. These are all important elements of research. Without understanding that, I don't think I would be able to deliver the work or in the past of delivering user or research insights. So it's extremely important. Can I use the latest and greatest tool right now? Maybe not.
That makes sense. Let me ask you another provocative question. And this is more of a devil's advocate one. And I know that I may sound a little arrogant and kind of a jerk with this line of questioning, but bear with me for a second because I'm trying to dig deeper here. Lots of companies out there invest in UX as a whole, and they hire UX designers that can also do some level of research. Why would a company need to hire researchers when the above mentioned generalists can do both?
I think this is a great question, and I think this question has been around for a while. This is not that you get to hear just recently because of a lot of boot camps around and a lot of certificate courses in the field of UX. It's if you're into UX, it's always good to know research methodologies. As a designer, you should know how a certain UX research method works, and you should be aware of how to use what and where, and that should be the aim of the course or of that particular course that is being taught. I think it's important. I think it also gets into the topic of generalist versus specialist. Again, this is an age old conversation, right? Where you want to do you want to be a generalist, which would in this case be a UX designer who knows how to do research, or you want to be a specialist, which is basically a UX designer who is solely focused on design, or a researcher who is solely focused on research. I think both have their place in this world of UX. I think it just matters, and it is all kind of connected with the type of project, the depth you want to go, the research methodology that you want to use, and the resources available. What how massive is the project, how deep we want to go in terms of uncovering the insights. I think this is all kind of baked in with regards to if a pure play UX researcher is required or a UX designer who can do research. Sometimes as a designer it could potentially be difficult to find an insight from a customer and have an unbiased way of looking at that particular insight, and that could be a potential challenge or a roadblock if you're aware of it. It also depends as to how you take in the insight. If it's qualitative feedback, would you assume that that's a quantitative insight and assume that every even if one person says it is applicable across the board, or you understand the difference between qualitative and quantitative. I think understanding and exploring as a generalist and developing your research skills definitely helps to become a better designer. And similarly, depending on the organization that you're working with or the team that you're working with, there is ample need to have specialist researcher to do generative research or new research or research that is going to help to develop the product ground up, and strategic insights, which is extremely getting important now as companies move into more customer oriented products. So everyone has their place to be in, and there's so much work that is out there for everyone. And you can be a generalist and you can be a specialist, and it's both an amazing way to reach out and to be reached out.
That's great. That's a great answer. Let me ease up a bit on the jerk line of questioning here and bring it back to something we can both enjoy. Let's talk research and design collaboration. What have you found are best practices when it comes to collaborating with designers? And what do you expect from designers?
This is a great question. I think the collaboration works out the best, and in my experience working with designers, is understanding what is the customer problem that we are trying to solve. And if you break down the goals of the problem It could be the customer goal or the business goal. Why are we doing this? Essentially, getting down to the research goals and understanding what outcomes that we need to get to, in the sense, what does this particular person need from the insights to help them design better. I think when we have that kind of open conversation early on and understand that this is the research goal or this is the outcome that we are going to drive towards, and we come to a consensus as to what the best methodology to be used to derive at that outcome, I think that is when the best collaboration happens on the onset. Now, during the process, also having an understanding and working with designers and understanding that some of the insights may not be baked into the designs, and vice versa. It's important to understand how to best provide the insights so that you can help the designer design better. But at the same time, it's not necessary that all the insights can be baked in. And also going back and forth. I think one of the cool thing about research is that you could, and this is an example of a methodology. There's a methodology which is called the rapid iterative testing methodology, or the right method, RITE, where you could be doing a usability test with one participant, and you uncover the insight, and then you collaborate back and forth with the designer and can on the fly change the design and go back into testing with the second user with an enhanced user flow or an enhanced design. Now, you don't need to wait for the set of 5 or 10 usability participants to get done with to find that particular insights, when you know that you could change and make that change in the design early on. So, this is an example of tactical collaboration. And in the same vein, if you were to look at more strategic collaboration, you could include designers in your interviews with customers, or take them, if you're doing a contextual inquiry, take them to the place that you are going to talk to the customers. I think context helps a lot. So these are some tactical ways that you could increase collaboration.
So you just mentioned a methodology that I really like to use myself. Actually, two of them being usability testing and concept testing. So these type of tests, designers can successfully run by themselves. Of course, there are different degrees of success, but overall, we can hold our own. But there are methodologies out there that researchers bring to the table that make them uniquely valuable.
There's an article that is very famous, I mean, which is, and I will try to link it up to, it's by Christian Rohrer. He talks about how do you break down research into different buckets, right? So the qualitative, quantitative, the behavioral, and the attitude. I think it's a 2 by 2. It's not, I think it is a 2 by 2 matrix, which is you could have something that is qualitative and captures behavioral insights, something that could be quantitative and captures behavioral insights, something that could be qualitative and captures attitudinal insights, and something that could be quantitative and captures attitudinal insights. I think understanding these buckets are going to be extremely important. And sometimes researchers and a lot of practitioners, this is where it becomes a matter of being there and doing more of it, that you try to understand and differentiate between these buckets and be able to allocate research methods into these buckets. Now, to break it down even further, surveys is a quantitative method, and it is very easy to build a survey, but it's extremely difficult to build a good survey. It is extremely difficult to even gather insights from a very good survey. Similarly, if you go on to the qualitative insights, qualitative methodologies, interviewing is exactly the polar, or I would say, if you had to have something very similar to surveys in a quantitative world, interview is something that in the qualitative world is thought of as potentially easy. Interviews are extremely difficult to be doing it correctly. Interviews to get the right answer can be very difficult, and it needs a lot of practice. And I wouldn't say a lot of practice. I think it happens with the more you do, and you get at a very good spot. I think what I love to say is making sure that in your interview, you try to get into asking people non leading questions or unbiased questions is one of the best steps to take forward, which is basically you start your questions with what, why, how, when, and where. I think these questions, when you start any question, any interview, and pause and let the customer or the user speak, I think that comes with a lot of practice and having patience. Filippo, now you're interviewing someone. If you break down the amount of times you speak compared to the user or your guest speaking, I think this is a great example of how interviewers take a seat back and listen to the interviewee answering. I think this is an example of how good interviews are done. So so these are two methodologies, but you could go crazy in terms of statistics, right? And taking a course in statistics and being able to apply also helps. It just builds more rigor into it, but it's not important to know it. But I think understanding how different statistical tests can be used and applied could be extremely helpful to for someone who wants to get into more quantitative side of things. And there are different methodologies that you could go in that we have used in the past that can be extremely helpful. And there's no end to learning more. So great question again, Filippo.
Great answer again, Sourav. One of the most interesting research methodologies that I actually saw you go through is eye tracking. And I say I saw you because I was actually there as an observer while you were running the test. How do you leverage eye tracking and why is that particularly useful?
Eye tracking is an extremely helpful way of getting rich data. You could use an eye tracker in a usability study. Basically, an eye tracker, I mean, most of us know what it is, helps understand where your eyes are looking at and how long they're focusing, to break it down very simply. So it looks at your gaze patterns. It also looks at how much time you're focusing on a particular element of a design or a page or a mobile phone experience as well. Why is it helpful? It is helpful because sometimes people tell you that looking at that or doing that thing, but it tends you will eye tracker will tell you that they are looking at a certain thing and they're missing out on clicking a certain button, or they're missing out on a certain piece of information that you would like them to focus. Now, in the past, we've used eye trackers in collaboration with a methodology which we are all familiar with, which is usability testing. So, usability testing, you do that and you pair that with an eye tracker. It'll give you such great results that it'll tell you exactly where the customers are or the users are essentially looking at, and also how they're going through the process of going through an experience. Keep in mind that whenever we do this usability testing, this is done through consent. They know exactly that there's an eye tracker, and they're aware of the fact that there is eye tracking happening. So even with that knowledge, it gives a very unbiased view of how a customer kind of goes through, or a user in a study environment goes through the process of testing an experience and being able to, and you can tell where they're looking at, what spots they're missing, or how can we improve a particular experience, because we can make some improvements to the design to make sure that the users are able to grab the information that is going to be important for them.
Saurabh, thank you so much for coming on the show. We are getting close to wrapping up, and let me ask you one last question. Are you open to mentoring, and how can folks reach out to you?
Absolutely, Filippo. I'm open to helping anyone out, mentoring, whatever they need in the field of UX research. Not so much design. I'm a bad designer, so but I'm happy to kind of like reach out to me via LinkedIn, message me, ask me, add me. I'm totally fine and happy to help.
I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are interested in any of the resources we mentioned, all of the links are on the episode page of our website, theindustryofux.com. Thanks to Sourav for coming on the show. Thanks to Youssef Hemimi for the audio engineering work. And a big thank you to Demi He for the post-production work. If you have any feedback about the episode or the show, you can tweet at Industry UX or leave a comment on our subreddit, The Industry of UX. If you really want to help or say thank you from the bottom of your heart, please leave a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps us climb the charts, bring the show to a bigger audience, and ultimately produce a better show. Last but not least, thank you for listening. And I'm looking forward to talking to you next week.